Quantitative Easing, Masked Parasitism, written by Taylor Pope Williams on July 6, 2018. In this paper, the author seeks to explain what quantitative easing is and how it affects the daily life of the reader. What is quantitative easing? According to Investopedia, quantitative easing is where, quote, central banks target the supply of money by buying or selling government bonds, unquote. The site continues by explaining why the central banks do this. Quote, when the economy stalls and the central bank wants to encourage economic growth, it buys government bonds. This lowers short-term interest rates and increases the money supply, unquote. The first part of the explanation is adequate, but the second part is what the author wants the reader to focus upon. Before continuing, the author will ask the reader, what causes the economy to stall? If the reader can provide the correct answer to such a question, then they will know why the author tells them to focus intently upon the second half of this explanation. For those who do not know why the economy stalls, Professor Stuart Crane gave the answer in his Wheat Receipts monologue. The money power restricts its issue of credit. Later in this paper, the author will demonstrate how sinister quantitative easing truly is. But for starters, the author will provide what he deems to be a more accurate explanation of quantitative easing. Here it is. Quote, quantitative easing is where the money power plunders the wealth of a people indirectly or directly, unquote. Indirect plunder, purchasing government bonds. The stalling of the economy due to the money power refusing to issue credit is the first step of their plunder process. When the economy is discreetly stalled, the money power calls upon the government of a particular nation to sell bonds. In exchange for the bonds, the government receives banknotes in an amount that is the principal of the bonds, and upon which the government is liable to pay the interest until the bond is redeemed. In order to pay off the interest of prior bond issues, loans, the government must exchange additional bonds for more banknotes. The money power obtains more wealth, while the government obtains greater debt enslavement to the privately owned central bank. Looking at this process from another angle will show us how sinister quantitative easing really is. Here's what happens. The money power creates the problem, and then states that the only way to incentivize it to stop creating said problem is for the government to harm itself, and consequently its citizens. Direct plunder, selling government bonds. Before continuing, the author will elaborate on deflation and how it impacts the populace of a nation. Deflation is where the money supply of a nation is made scarce. This scarcity leads to both debts, private and public, increasing in expense, and the means, for example jobs, to pay said debts decreasing in availability. Our current monetary system, where 97% of our money supply is interest-bearing credit, is always deflationary, i.e., it shrinks the money supply as a built-in process. When the Federal Open Market Committee, FOMC, of the Federal Reserve sells government bonds, it retires banknotes, for example Federal Reserve notes, from circulation. This is one way banknotes vanish out of the money supply. Deflation of the money supply leads to the foreclosure of businesses, which leads to both unemployment and underemployment. As a result, the general population has to either indebt itself further to the money power via interest-laden loans or relinquish their property to the money power altogether. This latter effect, which befalls the populace, is why the author deems this method to be, quote, direct plunder, unquote. Due to the money power legally charging interest, fees, and points on simple loan contracts, the overall cost of a mortgage for a business or home increases greatly. Then, when the money power cleverly eliminates the means from which people pay these debts, they provide themselves with a legal claim to seize the property. It is not only here that the reader sees how menacing quantitative easing is, but how our current monetary system is sinister in general. If the money power did not have the means to create money and charge interest, then, as Thomas Jefferson stated, the people would not, quote, wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. Unquote. What really happens? According to Investopedia, quote, a central bank is an independent organization responsible for monetary policy and is considered independent from the government. This means that while a central bank can give additional funds to banks, they can't force the banks to lend this money to individuals and businesses. Unquote. To sum up what Investopedia has written, through quantitative easing, the money power can keep the wealth of a populace with impunity. As a result of quantitative easing, three things occur. Number 1. Continual plunder. Through a central bank's purchase of government bonds, new currency enters the money supply, but this is deflationary currency because more currency, principal plus interest, must be paid back than was issued in exchange for the original bond. This process is a never-ending cycle of wealth extraction. Number 2. Financial enslavement. Due to the money power being the only one with the ability to issue capital, the populace has no choice but submit and pay interest. This is another feature of currency creation that must be addressed to end this never-ending cycle of wealth extraction. Number 3. Unnecessary hardship. Due to outcomes 1 and 2, the populace of that particular nation will suffer the consequences stated in the author's letter to the United Nations. Conclusion. The solution is obvious, and it is this. Get rid of the money power by outlawing private money creation and interest in money lending. If not, then this criminality, under the guise of public altruism, will continue to wreak havoc on every nation that permits its practice.